Hey, good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar. I'm Kenyon Gleason, president of NASGW, and I am so grateful that you could take a few minutes out of your day to join us for today's webinar. We've got a great group of folks as our panelists today. Clearly a different situation in the industry over the past 12 months following the election of President Trump. We've just had all kinds of challenges throughout the year, though things I believe are picking up and have started to pick up here at the end of the year. At least that's the word I'm getting. I alluded to a little bit of a interesting philosophy in my column this week in the Insights newsletter about this spirit of scrappiness, I call it. And I've had an opportunity to talk to literally hundreds of people in our industry throughout the past 12 months. And certainly we've lost some folks from the manufacturing side to the wholesaler side, but there's still this very strong spirit of fight and determination and trying to find a way forward. And so that's what makes today's webinar all the more relevant. Our panelists today, Tom, Mike, and Brad, along with George and Chris from Growth Strategy Partners, going to talk about trying to continue to build a successful business in the new normal. I hope they talk a little bit about scrappiness, because I think that that's really what it's taken to get through this tough year, and certainly will be more challenges as we move forward. But I do see positive things on the horizon. I've seen and heard a lot of positive things. I hope they'll reflect some of those things today. But again, I know there are challenges out there. So really want to thank you all for joining us. Thanks to our panelists, Tom Taylor, Mike Noell, and Brad Burney. Really appreciate your time and your insights and expertise today. And I'm going to turn it back to you, Chris, let everything get started. But before I do that, folks, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah. Really hope you have a great holiday season. And we'll talk to you hopefully at the SHOT Show. Chris, it's all yours.
Thanks, Kenyon. Chris DeCenzo here. Hey, welcome, everybody. Title today, Building a Successful Business in the New Normal. I'm honestly not a big fan of that term, new normal, but it's what most of us go by. I think we should maybe rename it Building a Successful Business with the New Scrappy. Maybe that's a better way. I don't know.
Yes,
but
yes,
thank you.
I like that.
You like that? So what we're going to do today, I'm going to jump right into it. The goal for today is really to provide some insights to you on how to improve your business, and maybe give you some tools that we might share. Talk a lot about the forecast for the future, but you hear some themes about that. Maybe motivate you to take some action. And the agenda we're going to follow is this. We'll get some introductions so you know who you're listening to. We'll talk about what's going on today, not too much, because we want to talk to Crystal and see what the future looks like, and hear from our experts about what they think demand's going to be next year. Then we're also going to talk about, from a business perspective, what can you do to improve your performance outside of just knowing what the demand is, and then we'll wrap that up. So let's start with some introductions. I'll give you a quick one here with the great pictures. Myself, Chris DeCenzo. So I lead this consulting firm, Growth Strategy Partners. My background is that I started working with Sturm Ruger, actually coming out of school. I'm an engineer. Doing that for 30 years, started a bunch of businesses, many of them in the consulting world, and decided to start a consulting firm to help privately held businesses grow. In 2003, I'm a gun guy, IDPA, USPSA, 3-gun, I hunt, and my only other male in the family is my dog Boomer. George, why don't you go?
God bless you. My sad tale of woe is Chris rescued me out of retirement in 2011 and convinced me to get involved with Growth Strategy Partners. And I have to say I don't regret that in the least. Prior to that, I worked for Sig for 21 years. I was co-founder of the Academy, did a whole bunch of other things. And I'm basically a technical training and education kind of guy that complements Chris in his management end of things. So
we're going to characterize you as a scrappy guy too. I'm going to be the refined guy, and you're going to be the scrappy guy. Okay?
I think I could probably fill that role. No problem.
So let's hear. We got three, great guests, great panelists today. Tom, Mike, and Brad. Thank you, all three of you, for joining. but I'll start at the top. Tom, why don't you give us a little background on you and what you're doing?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I currently serve as the Chief Marketing Officer and Executive Vice President of Commercial Sales at Sig Sauer. That also includes product management and development. In terms of broader scale, I've spent about 5 years at Smith & Wesson, about 5 years at Mossberg. Prior to that, I was in the consumer products industry, 21 years with the Coca-Cola Company. And so, today I hope I can bring a broad perspective on, a look at it from several different manufacturers, as well as the world that we now live in, which is going to be some kind of new normal. And I don't think anybody knows exactly what that is yet, but hopefully some of those perspectives will help us get a take on some of that.
Thanks, Tom. Mike?
Oh, good morning, everybody. I can't see who's called in, but I saw the list of who has signed up, and I know a lot of you, and a lot of you I've worked with previously. I miss you guys. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays to you and your family. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Mike Noell. I was an ex-Navy SEAL, and my whole vision starting Blackhawk was to build a better product for my teammates. That fast forwards about 8 years ago, we sold Blackhawk, and since then I've had the pleasure and the opportunity to kind of step back, take a break, and look at the entire industry from a 60,000 foot view. And like everybody else, if you take a break from something, you realize how much you miss it and how much you miss your friends. And now we've put some really great friends of mine at Blackhawk back together in a company called Sentry Products Group. Sentry being a name of a protector. We love that name. We feel like that's who we are and what we do and the products that we continue to generate. And I'm not quite sure I deserve to be on this call as a panelist, but hopefully I can enlighten somebody somewhere. And if I can do that, then it'll be a successful day. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And Sophie says hi, by the way.
Oh, hi, Sophie.
Brad, go ahead.
All right. Good morning. I'm Brad Burney. I'm the president of LM Burney Distributors. My company is a family-owned company. We've been in business since 1952, and I'm the third-generation president. I've been involved in it pretty much my entire life. We're a distributor of firearms, ammunition, optics, and other various things throughout the category. We're mostly regional, but are doing more and more business on the national level. And so I suppose if I have any use on this call, it's just from a historical perspective that I have spent my entire life in this and seen a lot of these situations where business tends to ebb and flow and change to a new normal, I suppose. So Merry Christmas. Thank you all for joining us. I appreciate it.
So change to a new normal. So that's the theme now, right? This has happened before, Brad, right?
Yes.
And what I like about the three guys here, Brad's from a distribution perspective. Mike's basically a startup, but been through it once, and Tom's worked for a lot of large corporations. So we've got looking for three different perspectives, and that's what we're going to be looking for today. Real quick on Growth Strategy Partners, if I get my slide to work. So for those that don't know, Growth Strategy Partners, we're a management consulting firm. We help increase the profits and the revenues and organizational performance of privately held companies, mostly in the shooting sports area. I'm an engineer, and we've done research to identify how do you grow. We've identified these 7 keys to growth. Some of them we'll get into today. But I think what we're proud about is what we've done from a results perspective, driving over 220% profit improvement on average across our clients. And a 7.4, that's a return on professional fees. So what clients pay us and what we give back to them in improved profitability. So that's and there's some clients that we've worked with down there on the bottom. Some themes I want to talk about today. So although we're talking about the new normal, again, which I'll probably say a few more times, I don't like the term, because when we talk about business and business growth, we've got some themes beside these 7 keys, and one of them is called relativity. And the point being, businesses and demand is going to go up and down. It's Brad kind of indicated a little earlier. And so what we've learned is that your performance is really relative to other organizations, other companies, and obviously direct competitors. And so your growth and performance is relative. I was talking to a business owner back in 15, 16, and he said, oh, well, I was up 12%. And I said, oh, that's too bad, because the industry was up a lot more than that. So, relativity, how are you performing this year relative not only to maybe demand in general, but your competition? Because it's about getting better. The other piece is profitability. We talk a lot about demand, which is the revenue top line number, but we really should be talking about profitability. How are we making money? Are we making more money? Are we more efficient than we were yesterday? So not just driving revenue growth, but the profitability of that growth. And then the third thing, because I had to keep with the ability themes, is the changeability. And I'm really talking about, is your business learning to get better? Are you improving? Are you changing and improving and adapting, if you will, to this new market, this new normal? Because it's not going to be the same. It's gonna ebb and flow. So are you changing? Is your business changing to adapt to the times? And that could be not only from a demand perspective, technology perspective, product perspective, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I think that adaptability into things is really important too, because your product managers and the folks that are making the decisions as to which direction you go got to keep their ears to the ground. They've got to study the data. They've got to look at trends and put their experience in what they already know with the trends, and they've got to stay up with what's driving those trends. The blogs, the writers, the news media, world events, that kind of stuff, and be flexible as to what direction they're going to go in.
And that's just some themes we'll reiterate it throughout today, but I guess although we're focusing on the new normal, I don't want to focus on the new normal. We want to talk about what you're doing in your business, how it's relative to others, how profitable is it relative to others, and are you adapting and changing for the new times? So let's talk about the current situation. I want to thank Jim Cucuruto at NSSF for providing these numbers, which shows you the adjusted NICs year over year since 2005. And what we've done, or what George and I have done, is taken 2017, we've got it through November, which is 12.3 million transactions, and estimated what we think December is going to be, and that's 1.7. So we're at 14, which is actually going to be lower than last year. That's our projection, but we'll get into this a little more. The thing you'll see here, and Brad, again, I think that's a great point you hit upon earlier. You see this over and over again, where we go through, through 2009, a little dip in 2010. We go up a few more years through 13. You drop down in 14. You go back up again, and it's down. We've had this, and we've seen this before. It's part of the industry. It's part of, unfortunately, how our industry works beyond just basic supply and demand. So, George, do you want to comment on this? You had an observation. I think you and I were talking the other day on this.
Yeah,
in terms of the numbers.
I think if we look at it, we'll see some similarities with historical events in this country. Right after Newtown, everybody in the country had the thinking that ARs and other guns and more restrictions, and we may not be able to buy these things. So all of a sudden, you couldn't find one, and they were selling them just as hard as they could possibly go. It was, panic buying, if you will, and kind of like the tide. Once you get saturated with all these things, and then that quote unquote hysteria kind of subsides, the buying trends go down. And of course, with guns go accessories and optics and all these other things. So it's the same type of thing. Then we pick up a little bit, and of course, with the anticipation in 2016 that Hillary was going to win the election, and again, we're going to have restrictions on firearms and that kind of stuff. We see sales just going right out the roof. And then, of course, once Mr. Trump did his thing and became president, the population is like, oh, geez, you know, we've stocked up on all these things. We've got all the ammunition we can stand. We've got all the guns and all this good stuff, and therefore the trend takes a little bit of a downturn. And if you look at the projection that we've come up with many different sources, it's right at about the same thing. So what I'm going to predict is that, we'll be a little lower as far as the adjusted NICS this year. I'm going to predict that it's going to pick up, and that's going to be driven by world events, current events. You know, if we have a war with North Korea, as an example, you're going to see gun sales go right out of the roof. Again, hopefully we won't have that, but or the war, that is. But the current events, what media tells us, and how comfortable we as the public feel in the current situation that we're in is going to dictate a lot of where the gun sales go. You know, particularly for personal defense.
So let's real quickly, just going to share some data, then we're going to ask our experts here. You know, this is some information from NSSF in terms of their observations, what happened over the years. You see that, you know, up for a bunch of years, down a year, and then back up again. Last 5 years was up 2%. Last 10 years was up 6%. And I keep using a 7% number as a, you know, average annual growth year over year. And just as a rule of thumb. Some other numbers, you know, Ruger and Smith & Wesson reported their revenue and profit numbers in the last month or so, and you'll see two things. You already see the revenues are down in both, but you'll see that the net income profitability is down even more than their revenue change. In fact, Smith & Wesson and Vista are projecting they've actually reforecasted their sales going forward to be even lower than they originally started by 7 and 9%. So as a little background, I want to talk now to our panelists and say, you know, guys, how would you describe what's going on now? Again, we've been talking at the macro number, but maybe give us some insight on, you know, maybe what you think has caused it first, you know, and is there certain segments that you think have been impacted greater or less? And I'm going to start kind of the top down. We had the introductions with Tom. So Tom, what's your thoughts about what's happening right now?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I mean, from our perspective, you know, my headline to this discussion for almost anyone I talk with, and I've heard others say this before, is that while gun sales are down, you know, and then you can see what NICS is, and then you can see it relative to some of the major companies. You know, we don't have as much of a market problem as we have an inventory problem. I think there are still a lot of people in the market out buying guns and buying accessories. I think it's still a pretty robust market. Certainly dealers you talk to will tell you sales are down. I spoke to a couple yesterday and they said, it's not going to be the merriest Christmas I've ever had, you know, because business just isn't as good as it has been. But I think it's when you couple that with the amount of inventory that's in the market, I think that's the biggest issue that we're dealing with right now. So, you know, the headline that we're trying to stay with is value. I think that when the consumer does walk in the store, I think they need to see a value. And I guess there's multiple ways to do that. You know, one way is with discounting, which is not, you know, a strategy we choose to pursue at SIG. But, you know, it certainly is prevalent in the industry. There's a lot of discounting, a lot of rebates, a lot of promotions and that sort of thing. But, you know, there's a lot of definitions around value. And I think that's the most important thing we can stay focused on in our current situation is how do we all, you know, work together to add value for the consumer? How do we add value for retailers, for distribution? You know, how does the manufacturer stay valuable? So, you know, those are the key themes that we're trying to work off of just as we kind of enter into this conversation.
Tom, do you think it's anything, I mean, without getting too detailed on it, anything more complicated than the election that drove inventory? You talk about inventory being the issue, inventory problems. Do you think that's mostly, the election surprise?
Well, I guess
I think it's more than that.
The way I would answer it is, I mean, how long can the market sustain a surge, if you will? I think the market has been, went through probably an 18-month period where, we kept having little issues that would pop up, such as Paris and San Bernardino and Orlando, and it just kept spinning the market. And, at some point, as history shows, and George alluded to that, those don't go on forever. And the way it's worked cyclically is, it seems like, I've been in the industry almost 14 years now, and, it will have a surge, for 12 or 18 months, and it'll seem to die down for 12 or 18 months, maybe a little longer, then it surges again. And I guess what we have to ask ourselves is will that always happen? Is there any such thing as a market that's going to be sustained for 2 years or 3 years or longer? And, right now the horizon has shown us, I mean, we've had two horrific events in the past couple of months that by all measures should have been on the same par with, maybe not Newtown, but certainly any of the others. And, I think there was a very minimal lift in the market. And so I think that just suggests that people are very comfortable with their politics. They're comfortable that there's plenty of guns out there. And so I think I don't know how to put a percentage against it, but a significant amount of the comfort in the market, I believe, comes from the fact that we have a strong Republican president and not a tremendous threat in Congress yet, even though that's waning a bit. But it feels like there's just a political comfort in our country that the things that have always made gun sales surge just flat out didn't happen this time. And I think that may be a first as far as I can recall in my 14 years.
Mike, what's your thoughts on what's happening in the current situation?
Well, to me, I think about things a little differently because I'm not a firearms manufacturer. I'm in that industry, but we really think about things on multiple levels: military, law enforcement, OEM, and commercial. But I think, to your point on the current situation, yes, there's a lot of overarching reasons for what's happening in the industry, whether it's up or down or left or right. But I think fundamentally, the way I think about it is when the going's good, manufacturers get lazy. And they get lazy because they start making decisions not based on being highly productive and highly effective every second of the day with their cash and cash flow and inventory and raw materials and bills of materials, but they get a little lazy. I'm in the same boat. And they're not thinking about what can and could happen. So hindsight's worth a lot of money, obviously, today, looking back on it. But if we look at all the raw material inventory, finished goods inventory, distribution, shelves full, stores full, while those are good things, we also, as an entire industry, I think became a little bit soft when the going was good. And that's exactly how we think about it. Demand planning obviously is important and it's interesting, but it's also one of the things that is the first thing that gets overlooked based on your cash flow and inventory supplies.
People have a hard time doing it, and we hear them just kind of throwing their hands up from our sales forecasting side, right? We can't predict it, so whatever, we won't. And I want to echo because Mike, you hit upon one of the themes today of relativity, right? I mean, someone says they're doing well because the market's going, they're riding the tide, as they say, but they're not getting any better than the other business, and they're performing equally well. Which again, hey, great. If you want to get up 10, 12, 13%, you think that's fine, but it's going to go back down like it is doing now, and they're going to be riding the tide back down just like everybody else and not being any better off, right? And that's kind of what you're talking about, is just not being lazy.
No, that's absolutely for sure. And, you know, it's a balance. So you have to balance, how do you keep up with demand when demand is good, because everybody wants it yesterday. At the same time, you also have to balance, at the end of the day, I mean, it's all about your cash flow, and how do you balance growth, retraction, and your cash flows, you know, among those things. And if you just give me another 5 seconds, you know, one of the things that I thought about, you know, what are we really talking about here today? There's a lot of information, there's a lot of data points, there's a lot of sources for that. But at the end of the day, everybody is on this call, me included, because we want to gain knowledge to do what? Grow our business and make more money. And as down to the bone cut as that is, that's, in my mind, what we really need to be thinking about. It's really not about the industry. It's about how do you proper prior plan and become highly efficient in your particular business. And one of the things that's interesting for me, I've kind of taken a break from working day to day. And as I've gotten back into it, having a brand new startup has been awesome, because you start thinking about all of the little things that you forgot about for the last numerous years. And we all think about different things. And one of the things that and I'll get off the line here in just a second. One of the things that it really came down to is, what is an employee? As the number one thing that we are. All of us on this phone call are employees of something, whether it's our retirement bank account, whether it's to our wives, or whether it's to our business. And at the end of the day, an employee, and I try to break it down to myself to remind myself, an employee is a healthy byproduct of a profitable company. It's that simple. So all of our jobs as employees is to make our business profitable. A little bit of philosophy there. Sorry, folks.
It's okay. No, you're going to hire you as a consultant. You're preaching. So
I'm sold already. You know. So where do we sign up?
Let's get to Brad so we can Brad, from a wholesale distributor perspective, current situation.
I would just kind of go back to a little bit of what both the other guys said. Inventory problem is a significant factor in the market. There was a lot of stacking in before the election, and you can do a great deal of looking at histories, at data, but at the same time you have to deal with assumptions and expectations. And I think this down cycle, which is maybe a little more severe as far as clogging the pipe than some of the others have been, was largely due to a lot of expectations of Trump not winning the election. The other factor that kind of went into that was what you talked about in changeability, the ability to react. And there was a lot of slowness to react throughout the pipeline. The manufacturers, a lot of them were very slow to start cutting production. So you had a continuous flow of product, and the next step in these cycles usually is discounting. So we've been going through that, which is painful on many levels. And it also tends to erode dealer confidence, because they become afraid to buy. When prices are fluctuating all over the place, it's difficult to get dealers to stack in. They don't know what the price is going to be tomorrow, and that's been a big factor in this market. Not all companies have done it. Some have done it more, some have done it less. So the current situation really, from what I would say, is we've kind of come through that, and I think we're going to start to see that leveling off. From what I'm seeing and hearing from the factories as they've begun to adjust to this, there will still be some continued discounting. But this year, the discounting has been the wild, wild west. So it kind of goes back to changeability. There was a lot of slowness to react. The signs were there, but planning was very difficult in an election where we all thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win, or I'm not going to say we all thought. If you looked at it on paper, the odds were better that Hillary was going to win. And I was speaking to a manufacturer the other day who stated, you know, if Hillary'd won, we'd all be geniuses right now. I said, well. Yeah, and if you know, if we'd sold off all these guns last year and put it in the stock market, we would too. But that's kind of the way it is. As far as driving the market forward, the discounting will continue to some level. I'm seeing that coming through already for next year. But I think we have to focus on other things to drive the market other than situational issues. Your new towns, your Las Vegas, those political and societal issues are not going to push this market forward. I think we're looking at going back to a time where you're going to have innovation. You're going to have new products out there. You're going to have to excite the base for the product and not just for fear of not being able to buy the product.
You know, you, Mike, Tom, you've all hit upon this somewhat of a same theme, which is, you know, we got to build good businesses, right? I mean, you know, the market demand is just one piece of it. The industry is just one piece of it, but you got to have good businesses, solid foundations behind it. And you've hit upon the changeability piece, the relativity piece. So, and I didn't pay you guys for that, so that's actually great. Which is, I think, but I want to add, right? I mean, as Mike mentioned, everyone, you know, most people are on the phone here trying to understand that. I think we know we need to have a better business, but a lot of the questions is, well, what do we do? What do we have to do to make our business better? And we'll get to that a little later on in the show. First, so let's jump to Crystal. And what I'm going to do, and so before we jump into the panelists, I'm going to ask the audience here, what do they think demand's going to be for 218 relative to 217? So you should be seeing a poll, and what I want you to do is just go click on a button there if you think it's going to be down over 5% or all the way up and over 10%. And we'll get a sense of what the audience says, and then we'll have a little reaction to that. I'll probably ask George to have some observations on this, and then we'll ask the experts, also known as our panelists. So everyone should just click on there. We've got a good percent clicking already. I didn't know if I should have had you know, down 20% and up over 20%, but I figured this would be a good start for numbers. And what I'm going to do is I'll close it, and I can actually show it so everybody should be able to see what we have for an answer. In fact, we just have everybody voting here now. So I'm going to close it, and I'm going to share it, and I'm going to ask George. You see it there, George?
I do.
So take a look. What's your reaction?
I agree. I think it's going to be closer to 5%. You know, with the majority. You agree
that everyone's all over the place?
No, everybody's all over the place, but the majority, the 31%.
31%. Yep.
It says that we're going to be up 0 to 5, and I really feel like we are going to be up probably 2 to 3.
Okay. We've got you've got 19% down, you get 23% up over 5%, you get 15% up over 10. I mean, yeah, you got the majority at 0 to 5%, but that's a pretty big distribution. You know, we've seen a lot more 80-20 rules, you know, with people voting in 2 or 3 categories.
That's true. That's true.
I don't know if any of the panelists want to comment on this at all, just from a reaction perspective. I'm just going to throw it out there.
This is Tom from Sig. I'll jump in first. Mike, you want to go?
Go ahead, Mike. Mike, go ahead.
Okay, you know, when I look at that, while I agree with the poll, it's a very small spread in what you're asking. So you're plus or minus 5 to 10% year over year, according to the poll. And if you look at that based on the entire industry, let's just assume for a second that it's 0, it's flat. We're back to the original discussion of what's happening with demand, what's happening with inventories, and ultimately what's happening with cash flow in your business. And when I look at this, some people are looking at these numbers going, wow, it's going to be up 5%. That's great. Oh, maybe that is great. But at the end of the day, we're not thinking about that at Sentry. We're thinking about how do we do better? How do we be a better supplier? How do we be a better partner? How do our relationships improve? And that may not be the text of the question here, but fundamentally, it's about the basics of block and tackling. And sometimes we get so off task making things complex that we don't get back to the very, very basics of business and manufacturing.
So how much emphasis do you put on demand for the future, for 18, 19, or anything? Mike?
We look at demand based on what we can produce in a given time frame. So if a customer or supplier is asking us for something, we're trying to figure out how do we get it to them quicker. And so to your point on demand, yeah, of course, we would love to have a year's forecast of any particular SKU or manufactured product, and that backs up the domino effect on the supply chain and raw materials and inventory. But at the end of the day, we are taking our history, which if you look at this poll is plus or minus 5 to 10% year over year. And what's the future going to be? Plus or minus 5 to 10%. That's the joy of having a small business, guys, is that we can modify that very quickly on our end.
Great. Brad, do you have a reaction? I'm going to use this slide actually as a reaction, but also, and I don't know, before I jump, Mike, do you have a guesstimate on what you think 18 and/or 19 is going to be?
Yeah, I'm with the majority, which is 0 to 5%. That's kind of how we're looking at it. If it's 10, I'd be surprised, happily surprised, but I think we're normalized right where we are, give or take.
Okay. Brad, reaction and forecast.
My forecast is going to be in the 5 to 10% range. I think we hit the bottom last spring and summer, and I think there's a lot of market stabilization that has occurred in the last few months, and I think that will continue. And what we needed was a more stabilized market in order to continue to proceed and grow. And so versus 17, I would expect 5 to 10% growth for 2018, just as coming out of this cycle. And when I look back historically at what happened after the Brady bill, at what happened after the election of President Bush, at what happened after the economic issues of the early 80s, I see a similar trend to this. There was kind of a cliff and then a stabilization and then some resumed normalized growth for a little while. So that's what I'm looking for.
Okay. Tom, what's your thoughts? Reaction and forecast.
Yeah, I mean, had I voted, I would have voted on the 0 to 5. I think the markets should be, fairly flat with the puts and takes of things that are going to happen around the industry, and hopefully, normalizing a bit versus a down year this year. I think, Mike hit it right on the head, though. I think as manufacturers, whether small, large, medium, or whatever we may be, I think the most important thing is to keep your eye on your own ball as best you can. I think, a lot of times everything ends up being so reactive. I mean, you could walk into a dealer this year and there were so many things on the wall, rebates and programs, that the consumer was confused at what to do and what to buy. And, at the end of the day, it was probably good for the consumer, but it just ends up being sort of a race to the bottom, if you will. But I think for manufacturers and brands that sort of, focus on innovation, focus on value, focus on telling a positive story. There's a lot of good things out there, good ways to communicate now that haven't traditionally been available to us as digital marketing increases. But I think, we have a little bit of a interesting paradigm at SIG because we have a large business in firearms, and then we have, medium and small size businesses in optics, ammunition, suppressors, and air guns. So, we get to see sort of both sides, where it's a little bit harder to move our gun market share, but we're certainly going to be looking to innovation and some new ideas and bundling some of the things that we have together to be successful. But also, we have very small share businesses where we have to really fight and scratch, to add value to those categories. So I think, if the market is flat, that's good, for those who are creative and innovative. But at the end of the day, companies may need to be flexible. If whether you're a retailer, a distributor, or a manufacturer, if your plan was A, and the market doesn't perform the way we thought, let's say it's not flat and it's down 7% or 10%. I think we have to be willing to adjust and not to just keep trying to fill the channel with product and push what's not there, unless there truly is something that is innovative and you can create some demand for in the market. So innovation, value, those would be the two key themes of what we'd be looking to focus on at SIG.
We're going to get into that. So let me ask you to elaborate on that also. Let's do this. So I guess maybe a question I have for not only the panelists, but everybody. If you could get a forecast that was 97% or more accurate, would you like that? I assume the rhetorical answer is yes. So let's talk about data. Let's talk about not guessing. Let's talk about using data to make decisions. And I'm going to share with you three places actually you can get data to help make decisions. The first is Marketplace Insight. This is actually a division of GunBroker. And so GunBroker does basically 5% of all the retail transactions nationwide. And they've been using that data, collecting that data to then make predictions, if not help you understand what's selling and how does your products or services or products in particular compare to others in the market. And what they've done is done some analysis to show how accurate their forecasts have been. I'm actually going to share it with you, but it's one way that you can actually go out and actually buy this data and see how does your product or service actually compare. In fact, let me share with you some of the data. And what they do is they're going to take the macro data. I mean, they have the NICS. They actually have an adjusted NICS, but they actually have obviously sales by pistols, by rifles, by shotguns. But you take your pistols into the revolvers or rifles into the semi-auto lever action because they're doing all these transactions. And this is just showing one of the reports that they have that shows you month over month from October to November this year, but also November from last year to November this year, and what the trends are. This is something that you can use to help you with your business. And I believe, Tom, you guys use this at SIG, is that correct? You use Marketplace?
Yeah, we use this pretty extensively. I mean, we use all the data we can find. I'm sure, most people in the industry, struggle with this as we do. I know, back in the days when I was with Coca-Cola, we had complete visibility of the market, whether it was Coca-Cola or Pepsi or Dr. Pepper or other categories like chips and cookies and snacks and different things like that. We had such insight into what was going on in the store and what happened on a day when the temperature was 90 degrees and what happened when the temperature was 50 degrees and those sorts of things. So we had a lot of visibility to what was going on. Here, we don't have that. And as far as I'm concerned, this is about as good as it gets. I mean, CLX data is good. It's got its flaws. This has its flaws. They all have different flaws, but this certainly gives you some very real-time data. It is a unique marketplace in that, we spend so much of our time focused on brick and mortar retail, and this is an online scenario, but it still gives you an indicator as to the market and what's hot and what's not. So we use it mixed with other things as much as possible.
So we reached out to Ryan Noakes, who runs the Marketplace Insight division, if you will, and we asked him, hey, Ryan, what's the forecast? Can you guys run some analysis to figure out what the adjusted NICS would be for 218? And he went into all the details about how not only there's a dozen regression algorithms that's built into the software that they have, but they added 10 or 12 more. And so they've done a projection on what demand is going to be for not only the rest of 17, but into 18. And he said their accuracy, this is a month-over-month accuracy that they have, is less than 3% of error, 97% correct. And so their projection for 218 is actually going to be down 5%. So they're figuring 217 is going to end just below 14 million, which is actually going to be a net 11% down for the year, and that 218 is going to be down 5%. I'll echo something that Ryan mentioned, that Mike mentioned earlier, that when you're seeing the incidents, terrorist incidents, tragedies, the demand is not kicking in like it used to. And without getting into it, I'm sure a lot of it has to do with the comfort level that we have with most Republicans, if you will, in Congress, and that laws aren't going to come through. So the other thing, and I just don't have slides for it, but NASGW is also working on a database to help their members in particular make better decisions. And I think when Kenyon has that done, there's going to be a big announcement that it's ready to go. I'm not sure it's ready now. Brad, you know, is it ready? Is it ready now, Brad? You know?
We're not at the live point on that yet, but this project we've been working on for some time, and we're really kind of getting to the point where I think we will see some solid production numbers very soon. We'll be both for manufacturers and distributors. Basically, it's a window into the supply chain of distribution throughout the country, and the numbers and the information and data coming out of it down to a granular level should be pretty impressive in what we can do with it.
Great.
It's coming, and it should have a very big window into the supply channel of the industry.
Awesome. So we're getting tight on time, so I'm going to still ask the panelists though, and maybe make this a 1-minute answer. What are you going to do? What should you do? What should business owners do to be better in 2018? We've had the steam already about just working on the basics of the business, but maybe you can get 1 or 2 key points that you'd suggest that either you're going to work on or you think they should work on. And I'm going to start, Brad, with you. You just finished. You know, what's your 2 or 3 key points?
I suppose I would kind of go back to some of the things that the other guys were saying, is looking for opportunities. I may get a little bit off the chart here, but we try to look at things as new ventures. So Mike mentioned coming in and kind of looking at you know, a startup. Well, it's good to look at things that way, and we try to take a look at things from a startup perspective, you know. And also going back, solidifying relationships. You have a lot of old customers, you have a lot of old vendors, and you need to work as partners through this period. Those are the ones that will sustain you, and it'll be okay. We've done this before. You just have to kind of ride this out and focus on being flexible and moving quickly when you start to see that data coming through that's where you need to go.
Thanks. Tom, key points. You've hit upon innovation already and value. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think those are, you know, the easier answers. I mean, on innovation, if you're starting now, you're probably late, obviously. So that had to be something that was in the works, you know, during those surge periods. And, you know, value is not an easy thing to say. Let's just go add value. So I think the other thing that we will stay focused on is just hard work. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, the online world is growing dramatically, with GunBroker and Guns America and several other entities that sell online. But I think at the end of the day, our industry is still one that is very, very much focused on retail, and we will, you know, stay focused there. And I think the way to stay focused there is with elbow grease and to make sure that salespeople are in the stores, you know, talking about innovation, value, the things that we've used as the higher level things. But, you know, there is no easy path here. I think in the day, people used to say, well, I'll buy a bunch of ads or I'll do this. And, you know, the marketplace is just too diverse and too hard to not just understand where you should invest your time and efforts and hard work. And so that'll be the next layer of what we're working on at SIG, is just to try to win through hard work.
Mike? Key points?
I got to tell you.
Suggestions?
Yeah, absolutely. I got to tell you a quick story because that'll lead right into it. A couple of weeks ago, I got invited to go to a bird hunt in New York, and I thought, oh, this will be great. These are a lot of neat guys that I don't know. I want to get to meet them. And I got teamed up with one of them, and we had a great day. At lunch, the discussion got to where are we going as humanity. And it was a very deep discussion, but he said, my brother's a visionary and he thinks in centuries. And I thought, you think in centuries? Holy mackerel, I can barely get my head around 2020, much less 2220. And it made me realize that right then and there, I know what I know, I don't know what I don't know, and I think about things different than other people might. And so the question to me was, what are we going to do different next year? And what it is for us is being able to understand what it is we do, not getting outside of our lane, the very basics of block and tackling. We want to be highly relationship involved. I think with today's world, Amazon's of the world, the online ordering, man, I got stuff showing up at my doorstep every day from Amazon. It's ridiculous how good they are. But for our industry and our little zone at Sentry, it's about people on this phone call. It's about how can we help you build your business and how can we be a part of that and how can we all share in that success together. And then obviously it's going to be product development. There's a lot of businesses in this industry that are hobbies. Maybe they're hobbies that have gone right and maybe they're hobbies that have gone wrong, but there's a ridiculous amount of very small single product companies out there that to Sentry's point, maybe belong with a larger company so that product can actually get to distribution or actually get seen. I'll leave you with one thing. If you got a pen and paper, write this down. As part of the Black Hawk executive reading years ago, I asked all my guys to read the book called The Goal. It's an older book. It's about 30 years old, and it's got the theory of constraint. And I love that book because it got us right back down to the basics of cash flow and being ridiculously efficient and not getting outside your lane. So if you have something that you want to read over the holidays, and that would be a good one. It might put some people to sleep. To me, I got energized.
Great book. Goes back to, I think, me getting out of college. So people, the three of you have actually hit upon, some of the thoughts that we were talking about, or, you hit upon customer knowledge, segmentation, the innovation. I want to hit upon just a few things with the short period of time that we have that we know from a basic blocking and tackling. We talked about assumptions. If you can't read it, it says, I made the mistake of thinking the manager of a Christian bookstore wouldn't have a gun, right? So what are you thinking? And how we talked about assumptions earlier. If you assume something, why is that? We found that back to basics, if you start documenting your assumptions and start challenging them, you'll actually have a little bit more refined perspective of what's going to happen. I'm also going to mention some more data that's out there. As an engineer, I've got that fault of trying to use data to make decisions. And I think it was Mike talking about, better relationships. Well, the question is, who are you trying to build a relationship with? Who's your customer and why are they buying? So Southwick Associates with the National Shooting Sports Foundation did some research, and I'm going to share with you just a few slides, but again, this is available for purchase. And it shows you, parts saying, why do people buy? It talks about, get the next slide here. Whoop, skipped over one. They've actually segmented our customer base into what I think are much better segments than just the, target shooter, defense shooter, or hunting shooter. They've got, the skill builder, the social shooter, the urban shooter, or urban recruit. And they've 8 different segments here that you can start peeling back to understand who's your customer. What are they buying? This is a quick view of the social shooter. It shows what their drivers are. It shows how they shop, what their average spend is if they buy a gun, if they don't buy a gun, and how are they influenced. One of the questions that we've got now in the question tab here is asking about, segmentation and promotion. How much promotion is involved. And really the question is, who do you promote to? So I'd encourage you to look at data. You can get this actually, There's a contact information for Nancy Bacon at Southwick, but I think at southwickassociates.com. You can find it also through the National Shooting Sports Foundation. This is a couple thousand, maybe $3,000 in data. Man, let's talk about information and knowledge that you can use to help your base business, not just next year, but on a recurring basis. So what I'm going to do, I want to ask one more poll, and then I'm going to wrap up, because the question I have, I think what we're curious is the challenges that people are facing going into 2018, if not into the future. We've talked about, basic blocking and tackling and elbow grease and working hard. The question is, what's your challenge going to be, the biggest challenge you're going to have, improving, growing your business in the future? And there's just 5 choices. It's all we get here. But how much is the planning piece? How much is the innovation? The matching demand and supply, understanding your customers, and building the realistic plan. Be curious to see what that is, and we'll probably close on some reaction to this. I've got 4 minutes left. So we're going to do 2 minutes talking about this, and then we're going to wrap up in 2 minutes. And we've got a lot of votes done here, so what I'm going to do is kind of close this up real quick and see what the challenges are, and maybe just get some reaction to this. So I'm going to close it. I'm going to show it. I'm going to ask George to start with what you see as the biggest challenge and what your reaction is.
Well, the biggest challenge here is building a realistic and implementable growth plan. Actually, I would have voted for understanding and targeting our customers better, because they're the people that drive everything. Without customers, we don't have a business. So, I share
that with you, because you can't build a plan without understanding your customer. And George, you and I know, working with many of the clients and people in the industry we talk to, when we ask them who's their ideal customer, often we get those that pay as the answer, right? Which is really is a terrible answer.
Correct. So, anyhow, that's my 2 cents.
Tom, reaction to this? Anything surprising?
No, not really, because when you think about building a realistic plan, it's certainly something that we've fallen prey to, being too optimistic, and setting our resources against that. So I'm sure everyone faces that, to make sure that we've learned, that the industry now has been through a couple of different cycles of not planning well, and it's hurt us all. So I think that's very, very interesting. And I agree with George that it probably, in my mind, it should be reversed, though, with understanding and targeting customers, and then building a sort of a realistic and implementable plan.
Brad, you got a quick comment?
I'm going to agree with the other guys. I think understanding and targeting customers better is the ongoing challenge. Building the realistic and implementable growth plan, that's something that comes out of being able to do better with the others.
Agreed. Mike, would you add to that, or?
I'm going to disagree with everybody. I'm going to go with number 1. And the reason that I like number 1 is because in my experience, there's some assumptions in there. Right now, we're probably all going through the same thing. We're closing out 17. We're building budgets and spend plans for 18, marketing, sales, warehousing, inventory, machinery, et cetera, et cetera. But fundamentally, what I've found, at least from my limited experience, is the sales plan. If you can get your entire crew, your entire company, your entire sales force, your executives, everybody on board with that, and they're excited about it, the rest tends to fall in place. You can't be too lofty. You got to be, realistic. But if I can get everybody singing off the same sheet of music, excited to go to SHOT Show, get the year started, the energy, I think, is the positive energy force is critical.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to wrap up. And so here's some notes. I think as we were looking at this, you see our themes there, but I think what we heard today, from a projection perspective, the audience was in the 0 to 5% up. Marketplace Insight was down by 5%. I think most of the panel was along the lines of more what the audience was thinking. But I think the theme, and it kind of connects back to maybe our three themes, is working on the basics. It's not about just the demand. It's about how are you running your business, and are you making your business more successful, more efficient, more profitable year over year over year. So we're at time. We went tight, but I hope we had a good conversation. I want to thank Kenyon at NASGW. Tom, Mike, and Brad, thank you all for joining us today. Very, very much. George, as always. And, we will be at the SHOT Show. If you enjoyed this presentation, you learned something, you want to buy us a beer, we'd be happy, or 7, we'd be happy to take that. So, thank you all.
Love to see everybody at SHOT Show. Merry Christmas to everybody. Happy holidays. And I hope you have a great new year. And again, look us up at SHOT. We'll be there working with clients, but we'll have some spare time to talk and socialize a little bit, and we'd love to see you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great holiday. Bye-bye.